morning. We'll be continuing through the Baptist Catechism. We are on question number 53. Question: what are we especially taught by these words "before me" in the first commandment? The answer: these words "before me" in the first commandment teach us that God, who seeth all things, taketh notice of and is much displeased with the sin of having any other God. 3 weeks ago, I had briefly touched on this point of what is meant by the words "before me" in the commandment. Part of this was inspired by a sermon from Voddie Baucham, who brought up this exact point. He first quoted a commentary from Walton, Matthews, and Chavalas, which states this: when the text says, "There should be no other gods before me," it does not refer to others having a higher position than Yahweh. The phrase "before me" means "in my presence," and therefore prohibits other gods from being considered to be in the presence of Yahweh. To paraphrase Baucham, the words "before me" are not simply a ranking, as if we can have another God after Yahweh, but that he alone is God and there is no one who is permitted to be before him or in his presence. There is no person, being, or thing that should even be in the same category as the true God. It's important for us also to know the why behind this commandment. We are not always explicitly told the why behind every commandment that God gives us. However, in this commandment, we are given a direct, laid out reason for why we must not have any other gods before the true God. We see this in Exodus 34, starting in verse 14. "For you shall not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Otherwise, you might make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they would play the harlot with their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and someone might invite you to eat of his sacrifice." So when God first commands the Israelites, and through the new covenant, this commandment also includes us now as well, he commands them to worship him alone. God is explaining to them and to us that there are natural consequences to this action. This is not a situation where one could easily go over there, worship some other god, come back like nothing had happened. Rather, God says in verse 15 that if they were to worship other gods, that they may very well begin to make other covenants with wicked nations around them and become entirely swept away by other gods. He continues then in verse 16, "And you might make some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlot with their gods." This initial worship of other gods, while potentially seemingly subtle at the beginning, is now seen to be something that turns into an entire uprooting of their lives, not only causing themselves to fall away, but causing their family to fall into the same snares of these false gods. Now, of course, in today's world, we do not see the same blatant examples of false gods as we do in Exodus and throughout the Bible. However, there are still many false religions and cults that we see today, as the enemy has deployed much more subtle approaches to deceive. We see this especially in Islam, which even recognizes the Old Testament and 3 of the Gospels most of the time, yet they reject God as the Son of God. And we also see Jehovah's Witness and Mormons as another example of those who recognize God, or who recognize Jesus, but they do not actually recognize him as God. They recognize him as the son of some kind of Son of God, but not God himself. So as we who are grafted into the promise of God through Christ, let us also take heed of the warning and command given in these verses and shown in this catechism, that we too shall have no other gods before our Lord. Amen.